All right, welcome, everybody. Going to give everyone just a minute here as the numbers keep jumping up as everybody gets into this session. We'll give everyone a chance to get settled in, and then we will kickstart the fun with y'all. Thanks for being here today with us. While you're waiting, feel free to say hi in the chat. Tell us where you're coming from, what school you're representing today. Super excited to see everybody coming in here. Yeah, already a few familiar names and faces. That's great. Oh, I saw Chris in there. Hi, Chris. Hi, Rebecca. See you in there. Isabel, hi. So great to see everybody coming in. Oh, it's already buried by South Philly, Philadelphia represent. Welcome. Sarah from Philly, thank you. All right, well, we've got a pretty good group settling in here. So I think we'll go ahead and get started now. Welcome, everybody. I think first and foremost to this first study of its kind for SimpsonScarborough, our first national study of alums. My name, if you don't know me, is Steve App. I'm the AVP of Marketing and Business Development here at SimpsonScarborough. I want to start off by sharing a bit of background for this report, but before I do so, I also want/need to share a few important housekeeping notes. So first of all, yes, we are recording this webinar, and yes, you will receive a copy of this recording along with the full research report following this webinar. Please do, as you already are, keep using the chat feature throughout the session to share your opinions with us. If you have a question about the research, the best way to get a response, either in the Q&A portion of this webinar or from our partner and VP of Research and Analytics, Meredith Simpson, who is here with us today and who led the research for this report, I definitely encourage you to use the Q&A feature. Now, about this report, we've conducted multiple studies on higher education chief marketing officers and prospective students here, especially over the last several years. But focusing on alum feels very critical in this moment. Like many of you who are here with us today, I feel like we are seeing this changing financial model of higher education, one that features challenges in relying on net tuition revenue, and for some of you, depending on the type of institution you represent, declines in state appropriations. And so it's clear to everyone here at SimpsonScarborough that fundraising is becoming and will continue to become a critical aspect of institutional financial health. And we think that marketing has a major role to play in that work. And that's really what led us to this report. Now, I'm not alone in presenting this data to you today. I'm joined by my wonderful colleagues, Sara Wallace, our VP of Strategy, and Jason Simon, our CEO and partner. You'll also notice Meredith Simpson, as I mentioned earlier, active in the chat, as well as perhaps other members of the SimpsonScarborough team who are attending today and will be making their voices heard in the chat function as well. I also do need to say that while you'll actively hear from the three of us today, I can't emphasize enough how much of a team project this and all industry research reports are. So if you're personally connected with someone in our agency, chances are they have played an active role in making this report what it is today. And I know I speak for Jason, Sarah, Meredith, and Carrie, and everyone else who's on this call, how grateful we are for everyone's efforts. We're also incredibly fortunate to have received contributions to this report from a long list of industry friends and colleagues. These individuals share their perspectives with us in a variety of ways, but the uniting effect of their contributions is that we were able to produce a better report thanks to them. I know some of the people that are on this screen are on this call, and to each of you, I say directly, thank you. And with that, I'll be back a little bit later, but for now, I want to turn the microphone over to Jason, who is going to share a bit more about the landscape surrounding this report, and then share our first finding. Jason?
Great. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate the introduction. And as you just mentioned, I really want to thank all of our team, as well as the client partners that have contributed to this study. We're really excited about what we've learned, about its importance in relation to both perceptions about higher ed generally, as well as, particularly how it relates to alum engagement and philanthropy. You'll hear us talk about some interesting juxtapositions throughout this session today, and you'll get some detail on all of that as you get the full and written report, which we will be following up and sending to everyone after this call. One clear area that's really interesting to point out is that kind of despite some record years in dollars raised, perceptions around higher ed's value are continuing to decline. In last year's philanthropic total for giving was $59.5 billion, the highest ever year-over-year increase, 12.5%, according to CASE, or the highest since 2000, I should say. The most ever raised, however. And while we've seen report after report from places like New America, Pew, Morning Consult, Gallup, and other sources that have talked about the declining perceptions. And so that juxtaposition of raising more money than ever, it's the highest year-over-year increase, and to contrast then with the decline in perceptions, I know is one of those things that we were really, really concerned about. One of the things that we noticed about many of those other studies that have gained considerable media attention and a lot of attention with your presidents and chancellors, to be honest, is that they include perspectives of citizens that both have and have not attended college. And there were really, really discrete differences between folks that had had earned a degree or gone to college and those that had not. Obviously, that's concerning. But one of the things that we really wanted to understand was how those perceptions would differ with a more focused audience. And so our study is a bit different than some of the other national studies that you may have seen around trust and perceptions of higher education. We focused exclusively on college graduates, alum, for this study. We did not include, as I just mentioned, folks who did not graduate from college, because we wanted to focus on those who had experienced college and ask them their perceptions of both philanthropic trends, engagement trends, as well as generally perceptions overall. So the data in our study is geographically representative of the US population. We looked at things like age, reported debt levels, whether someone was a first generation student. You can see here that about 80% of the respondents on this survey make between $50,000 to $150,000 per year. And about 45% of respondents reported that they gave between $100 to $1,000 in their last gift. And about 21% of respondents said they gave a gift of $1,000 or more. So we have a good, nice mix of giving history as well. We've run secondary analysis by a lot of factors, race, ethnicity, income, to really ensure that we had a wide range of perspectives. We also looked at things like household income, political affiliation or leaning, age, whether they're first generation or not first generation, whether they were currently paying loans or not, and how much those loans were. Things like the type of institution that they went to, public versus private, or HBCUs and HSIs. We have all of that data and all of that information. In many cases, we have statistically significant response from many of those secondary factors. However, for the most part, we did not see a lot of difference by any of those elements, by any of those secondary factors. Where we do have some, we'll be sure to call that out in the data for you. Or if you have a question specifically about something that you're curious about, make sure you put that in the chat. And that's one of those things that that one of the folks from our team can really answer in that chat section. So we really have organized this report in 3 themes. The first of which I'm going to cover, which is that higher education is not a giving priority for college-educated adults. So as we move to the next slide, you can see here that about 3 in 4 college-educated adults reported that they have given to at least one cause or organization in a typical year, but fewer than 1 in 3 have ever made a financial gift to their undergraduate alma mater. And then if you look at the chart on the far right, you'll see that it's rare for non-alums to give to an institution that they or their family did not attend. Only about 1 in 10 have said that they have given to those institutions. So as we begin to look a little bit at what motivates people to give, we can see some interesting things here. Most of the reasons why people report giving are consistent, regardless of whether they have given or they have not given. 63% of non-givers and on 58% of givers indicate that supporting a mission that is meaningful to them is the top reason for giving back to any organization, not just higher education. This is important. You know, these are motivators to give overall, not just specifically to higher education. Additionally, both givers and non-givers kind of equally rate addressing a societal need or problem as the second highest motivation for giving. We'll talk a little bit more about the importance of then tying into how your institution in higher education helps address a societal need. Some of the top reasons for giving are also consistent across audiences, but you can see a little bit further down, and the elements here that are in blue are those where there starts to be a little bit of a gap between givers and non-givers. So for example, giving back to an organization out of gratitude, 45% of folks who have given as opposed to 38% of non-givers, or showing pride in an organization, 20% of givers versus 12% for non-givers. And then even moving a little bit further down the chart, you can also see things like just maintaining a relationship, or simply because they've been asked. A little bit of difference between folks who have been given or folks who have given and those who have not given. So, for the most part, a lot of consistency here. But some interesting differences, between the audiences as well. When we look at the top giving priorities and what people are giving to, we're seeing things like children's and family services, animal welfare, poverty be at the top of the list, both for alum who give and those who report that they have not given. Those are the top priorities. Higher education, both public, private, and community colleges are much, much further down the list, as you can see here. And a key difference in some of the top giving areas, between the top giving areas and then institutions of higher education, is that those areas at the top are really ones that tend to elicit emotion. Going back to the previous thing around being able to connect to a mission or a broader societal cause, we saw those as top motivators for giving. And so here, one thing that we felt like was really important to pull out was the importance for marketing and advancement leaders to align some of the fundraising pillars to things that elicit emotion. A really good example of that throughout the pandemic, and then just even around basic needs and supporting students, are some specific fundraising things and successes around things like campus food pantries, or immediate student success initiatives, and tying directly to those types of things and those kinds of initiatives cannot be overstated. So why aren't alumni giving back to their, did we skip one, Carrie? Yeah, so why aren't we alumni giving back to their alma maters? Among the alum that we surveyed, the top hesitations all really center on cost. They just don't see higher education in the same way that they view other charitable causes and organizations. They often feel like they've already given back to their institution through tuition, through education. And then there is the question of, where will my money go what's it being used for, which really alludes to a lack of communication about the fundraising focus that many institutions have and how quickly those dollars may go to those specific initiatives. And so, again, even thinking about something like a student food pantry, there's a really, really quick return on giving there that can be clearly communicated. Many alumni see institutions as being more for-profit than nonprofit, which absolutely influences motivations for giving back. Certainly that ties to the feelings and perceptions around cost. In some ways, this finding really is parallel to something we learned in our prospective student survey at the end of 2022, where we heard from prospective students that they felt like schools cared more about making money than they cared about student success. And so here we really, really have got to make the case in a much stronger way around where dollars are being spent, what tuition goes to versus where other things go, where philanthropy goes to, and being more clear and direct in that kind of thing. A few other notable areas of barriers as well, and we'll talk about this more as we move through the rest of our session. But you could just note even down that just 6% of non-donors and 4% of donors say that not having a good experience was why they hesitate to give. So it really is not about their own individual experience. And we'll talk more about that as we move through. But that is one of those juxtapositions that we think is really, really interesting. And then nearly 11% of donors simply say that they don't give because they receive too many solicitations. So again, we know many of our clients struggle with the decentralized nature of their institutions, the amount of solicitations that are going out many times in the same day or the same week, not in the same systems, no way to be able to account for all of those things. And I think that that's a fairly high percentage of donors who simply are opting out of giving because they're tired of hearing from you. So with that, I'll pass it over to Steve to cover our next theme.
Thanks, Jason. And I'm honestly really excited to present this second finding because it's probably my favorite of the whole study, which really is exploring a sense of cognitive dissonance that we see from alum in regards to their personal experiences versus their perspective on the broader industry. So let's start this finding with a dose of positive news. So we know that within some of the studies, even that Jason mentioned earlier in our presentation, the perception of higher education has been declining for a number of years. However, when we examine just college-educated adults, we can see that the majority have a positive opinion of higher education, with an identical percentage of respondents who say that their opinion is very positive versus negative, and much better than the percentage who say that their opinion is very negative. Additionally, more than 1 in 3 college-educated adults say that higher ed has a positive effect on the United States today, while only 5%, or basically 1 in 20, believe that higher education has a very negative effect on the country. So thinking about where we are right now, that is the good news that we're seeing in terms of perceptions of higher education. But if the current state of opinions among college-educated adults is more positive than the general public, the trend line that we're seeing is pretty consistent with prior broader studies, for example, from Gallup and Pew Research, and that is not great for our industry. So in our study, 1 in 3 alum say that their opinion of higher ed has declined over the past 3 years. And you'll notice here that that is twice the number who say that their opinion has become more favorable. Interestingly, this outpacing is in stark contrast to what we have seen on alum research projects that we conduct for individual clients. In those studies, alums' less favorable perception of their alma mater has never outpaced their more favorable perception. And so really, this is our first glimpse into the differences between one's feelings toward personal experiences and personal connections versus industry perceptions. A deeper look into the trend line here shows, I think, reason both for concern and opportunity. So the cause for concern should be pretty clear. Sentiments around higher education are evolving, and they are not evolving in the right direction. So first, among alum who have negative opinions of higher education, 9 in 10 say those opinions have become less favorable. We were already not doing well with these individuals. Now it seems pretty clear that we are not going to recover them. But more troubling, in my opinion at least, is that the situation, I should say, amongst those who have a neutral opinion or a positive opinion. So of those with a neutral opinion about higher education here in the middle, you can see that only 8% say that their perceptions have become more favorable, compared to 43% who say that their opinion has become less favorable. And even those with positive opinions about higher education, they have, by and large, a declining perception of the industry. You can see that 26% say their current opinion is becoming less favorable versus only 14% who say that it's becoming more favorable. But about the opportunity, so Jason mentioned earlier some of the subgroup analysis that we ran for this research, and there is some opportunity in that subgroup analysis. Younger alumni, for example, are more likely to say that their opinion of colleges and universities has become more favorable over the last 3 years. That's also the case for underrepresented minorities. And first-gen alumni are more likely to say that their opinion of colleges and universities is positive or very positive, and additionally, that their opinion of colleges and universities has become more favorable over the last 3 years. And these really, those groups I just mentioned, these are critical audiences for the future of higher education. And I think these subgroups within our larger data set show that rather than just bemoaning the critics of higher education, of which there are plenty, we should really be focusing our efforts on aligning ourselves and building deeper connections with those who already have positive perceptions, or at least remain in the winnable neutral category before they decline to the point that really, as we see here in this chart, a point at which there's no return. So what is driving the increasingly negative perception of higher education? So most other national studies, including the 2019 Pew report, they point to political influence, where the increase in negative views comes entirely from Republicans or independents who lean Republican, in contrast to Democrats and independents who lean Democrat, who remained largely stable in an overwhelmingly positive perception. But in our study, which again is focused solely on college-educated adults, we don't really see the same gap as shown in those reports. So in fact, you can see here that current alum opinions of higher education, by and large, trend pretty positive all the way across party lines. And in fact, moderates and conservatives are actually slightly more likely to say that their opinions have become more favorable than liberal respondents. And this is not to say that there aren't partisan differences at all. When we look at the effect of higher ed on the country today, you can see here 45% of conservatives who are reporting a negative or a net negative effect, while 54% of liberals report a net positive effect. But what I think is actually most interesting here, again, is the contrast between how those with negative perceptions of higher ed feel about their own personal experiences. So I referenced this earlier, but I want to go a bit deeper here. The majority of respondents who say higher education has a net negative effect on the state of the country today also say that their own undergraduate alma mater experiences were largely positive. So 61% of that demographic say that if they had to do it all over again, they would still choose to attend their undergraduate alma mater. And 64% of alum who believe higher ed has a negative effect on the state of the country also say that their undergraduate alma mater had a positive impact on their life. And 69% of that same group said that they are proud to have attended their undergraduate alma mater. But here is a space where we do see a difference. An overwhelming 72% of alumni who felt a positive effect on the state, who think higher ed has a positive effect on the state of the country, feel a strong sense of connection to their alma mater. In contrast, we see that only 4 in 10 alumni who think higher education has a negative effect on the country say that they have a strong sense of connection to their undergraduate alma mater. So if the difference here in terms of some of those perceptions about the industry is not coming down to political party lines, then what is driving the dissonance that we see earlier in this finding? I think it's pretty clear here that it is their sense of connection, or in some cases, maybe the lack of one, that is driving that perception. And honestly, I think this should be exciting to all higher ed marketers, because a sense of connection to one's alma mater is something that we can make progress against much more than we can anyone's political affiliations. So again, there is some opportunity here in these findings, even if the trend line maybe hints a little bit negative here. There's more cognitive dissonance to explore within this finding. When we ask those who believe that colleges and universities have a negative effect on the state of the country, you can see that college-educated adults largely focus on matters of cost. Now, other national studies have emphasized the declining trust in higher education, and it's often said that the onus for that falls on us as marketers and communicators and advancement and development administrators in higher education, who just need to do a better job of storytelling. But I would say as long as we continue to skirt around this main issue of cost contributing towards that negative perception, this trend right here in this word cloud in terms of the open ends, this is a trend that's going to continue to prevail. I also think it's probably worth calling out on this slide that while our data earlier didn't show large differences in political affiliations, we do see an undercurrent here of political perception associated with higher education. In the open-ended responses, you can see that on the right side here, we found that conservative-leaning respondents were particularly likely to also use words in addition to cost, use words like liberal, woke, agenda, or indoctrination. So there's definitely some political differences here. Interestingly, though, when we look at the quantitative data, it again does not reflect what we just saw in the majority of open-ended responses, which is namely that debt and cost seem to be a main driver of negative opinions towards higher education. So we can see here that alumni who are currently paying student loans, taking any loans for school, or taking out higher loan amounts tend to view higher ed negatively at similar levels as alumni who are not paying any loans. You can see that here with the 17% and the 15%. In fact, we actually see that in-debt alum are more likely to say that their opinion has become more favorable in the last 3 years than alumni not paying loans. And we can see that being in debt or not being in debt really just has no impact at the quantitative level on the positive or negative perception of the impact of higher ed on the country. So again, this difference between an individual's stance with debt versus how they feel by and large about debt and cost within the industry. So I've mentioned a few times that there is opportunity in this data. And I think we really should be focusing our efforts on the opportunity, because if we can create deeper connections with college-educated alum, with positive or even just trending positive perceptions, we will see the fruits of that labor. So you can see here that college-educated adults who say their opinions of colleges and universities have become more favorable over the last 3 years are twice as likely to have given a gift to and volunteered for their undergraduate alma mater than those who say their opinions stayed the same. And that is actually a wonderful transition to my colleague, Sara Wallace, who is going to present our third finding, really picking up the baton here on the volunteering angle. So Sara, I'll give it to you.
Thanks, Steve. So Steve mentioned in the second theme, a significant opportunity for institutions around leaning into the middle ground or audiences that indicate a neutral or positive perception of higher education today. and feel a sense of connection with their alma mater. When looking more closely at the data, we can see a unique and burgeoning space for institutions to connect with alum who fall into these categories. The reason why this is so important is that based on our work with advancement teams across the country, we often hear that alum communications are largely focused on giving. The calls to volunteer are more passive or secondary, often lost in the clutter or flurry of newsletters and capital campaigns. The data that we collected in this survey from college-educated adults supports a shift in this narrative for institutions. It starts to show us that focusing on the many ways alum can engage with an alma mater beyond monetary giving increases the likelihood of an alum giving in the future. This sets the stage for how institutions can develop the right strategies to build a strong pipeline for giving in the future. So we'll start with the power of trust. We all know that trust is a foundational element of loyalty and giving in philanthropy. We also know that trust and brand values are significant attributes that audiences weigh heavily in determining how to engage with the brand, especially today. Establishing and maintaining trust with alum is a critical area of focus for advancement teams. 8 in 10 college-educated adults say that it is essential that they trust an organization before giving to it financially. You can see on the data charts here that volunteers at both public and private institutions indicate a higher degree of trust compared to non-volunteers. Public institutions in particular are earning the highest trust rating at 48%, of volunteer respondents rating it in the top 3 box. Overall, alum volunteering is growing in popularity for both public and private institutions. And since volunteers are showing higher degrees of trust with their alma mater, this does make the audience prime for continued engagement and for current and future giving initiatives. One of the most significant reasons trust building is so important for advancement teams today is that trust forms a sense of connection and community between institutions and alum. And Steve started to touch on this throughout that second finding. This sense of connection really resonates deeply with volunteers who indicated that pride at 29%, mission at 32%, and gratitude at 29% are all major factors in deciding to give. These are all emotive drivers or feelings that are either fueling or reinforcing a sense of belonging for those alum. Another important call out here is that 22% of volunteers indicated that fulfilling a duty or obligation I feel to my alma mater is a strong motivator to give, compared to 10% of non-volunteers. The sense of community and connection contributes to a feeling of responsibility when it comes to giving back. There are a few volunteer alum segments that reported a stronger sense of connection to or positive opinion of their alma mater. Underrepresented minorities in particular who have volunteered were more likely to say that they feel a strong sense of connection to their alma mater compared to the general population. With many institutions today indicating interest in personalizing their communications more to audiences and diversifying their student body, this we felt was an interesting call out. And finally, a quick note on non-volunteers. Non-volunteers are driven to give based on functional or real factors like the creation of scholarships at 31% or providing access to current or future students at 29%. There is a path here for advancement teams to engage non-volunteers in a targeted way, with messaging focused more on those functional features versus the emotive ones. Let's dig in further on volunteers and understand what volunteerism looks like for alum who indicate that they have volunteered at their alma mater. Across both public and private alma maters, volunteers indicated that participating in on-campus events at a significant margin of 51%, mentorship at 32%, or presenting in a class at 23% are some of the most meaningful forms of connection. An interesting layer here, when we consider that trust is the highest between volunteers and public institutions, is that public institution alum were more likely to say that they have mentored current students or presented to a class compared to a private alum. The hands-on nature of these opportunities continues to support that sense of community building that we've seen in the data so far. The takeaway here is that the To connect with recent alum and also maintain engagement with existing volunteer alum, institutions can lean on a few core volunteer opportunities that will help to build and or sustain that connection. Focusing on volunteers and understanding what motivates them is important for strategic planning because these motivators contribute to volunteers prioritizing giving to their alma mater versus other philanthropic initiatives. For both public and private institutions, volunteers are far more likely to prioritize giving back monetarily to their alma mater, with 20% of public institution volunteers indicating that they prioritize giving to higher ed, and 13% of private institution volunteers. Both public and private institutions have a margin of distinction here when we're looking at volunteer response versus non-volunteer response. Beyond the correlation between volunteers and their likelihood to give to their alma mater, we can also see that volunteers overall have a more positive view of higher education and their alma mater, and that continues to grow over time. 60% of volunteers expressed a positive or very positive opinion of higher education, compared to 51% of non-volunteers. Similarly, 33% of volunteers indicated that their opinion has become more favorable the past 3 years compared to 12% of non-volunteers. This starts to show us that volunteering serves as a great pathway or entry point to continued long-term engagement with an alum. These positive perceptions from volunteers move beyond the boundaries of the higher education industry on its own. Alum volunteers are nearly 3 times as likely to agree that higher education is having a positive impact on the United States, with 58% of volunteers indicating that higher education is having either a positive or very positive impact on the US, compared to 37% of non-volunteers. When we look at some of the cognitive dissonance that Steve was mentioning in finding number 2, this is especially interesting in understanding that volunteers are showing to be much more engaged and have a positive view of the industry and its impact overall. In a landscape where the stigma exists around the value and impact of higher education, volunteers are an audience that's actively engaged in the principles and the priorities of the institutions and of higher education, and are clear advocates for the value of higher education. This thinking is further supported by looking more closely at the percent of volunteers who've donated to their alma mater versus non-volunteers. Those with a volunteer history are clearly more engaged with their alma maters and identifying multiple ways to give back. 65% of volunteer respondents indicated that they've made a gift to their undergraduate alma mater versus 21% of non-respondents stating the same. When digging further into this volunteer respondent data for this specific question, we are able to see that underrepresented minorities are more likely to have both given to an alma mater and to have volunteered. This is a really positive signal that engaging underrepresented minorities early and often with opportunities to volunteer will increase the likelihood that they will give in the future. Now that we can see the link between volunteering and giving, let's take a closer look at the young alum segment specifically. Based on our findings in this survey, 7 in 10 alum in their 20s have volunteered their time to support their alma mater. 72% of respondents stated that they have volunteered at their alma mater, the highest percent overall when looking across all age groups. When pairing this finding with the data point that younger alum are more likely to say that their opinion of colleges and universities has become more favorable over the last 5 years, this overall audience segment, similar to underrepresented minorities, shows significant promise for future giving if engaged in the right ways. So I mentioned on the last slide that 7 in 10 alum in their 20s volunteer at their alma mater. So we have a majority of respondents indicating that they are active with their institution. When these volunteers were asked about their plans to give to their alma mater within the next 3 years, 64% confirmed that they do intend to give monetarily, compared to just 15% of respondents with no volunteer history. What this means is that advancement teams should remain focused on volunteers as a priority audience to build connection with ahead of and during philanthropic or capital campaigns, especially, again, those two segments of young alum and underrepresented minorities. The third finding or theme of this study is that the next generation of donors is most likely to get engaged and stay engaged as both volunteers and as givers when the connection point with their alma mater is not solely requests to give. We reviewed data that supports alum segments that will be a growing population for institutions, if you're lucky, among others, generally having a more positive view of higher education and their alma maters, and their rates of volunteerism are higher. 24% of young alum have already made a gift to their undergraduate alma mater, and 13% have made a gift to an institution that they haven't attended themselves or a family member hasn't attended. Alum in their 20s are the largest audience to indicate giving to higher ed overall, not just their alma mater. Their participation levels are either in line or above other alum age groups. So focusing on young alum volunteers will allow institutions to cultivate and strengthen a long-term pipeline of engaged, loyal alum. They're more likely to give to institutions overall, including a school they didn't attend. They are present, strong contributors to their alma maters today.
So I think the big thing here is what gives. Jason shared a bit about the tension that we felt in putting together this report towards the top of the webinar here today. And I think that is a tension that at almost every stage of putting this together left us asking that question. I do think there are a few things that we are confident about. Number one, college-educated adults do give. They are philanthropic at every age group, but higher education just simply isn't a giving priority compared to other nonprofit institutions and societal causes. We know that alumni take great pride in their own college experiences, but we know that that doesn't translate to their views on the state of higher education today. And as we just heard from Sara, we know that volunteering is critical to ensuring a future pipeline of donors. I think that third point there is actually a nice segue into maybe almost a larger takeaway here, which is that I think higher education is, as we all know and would admit, pretty cyclical. And that can very easily lead to short-term thinking and priorities. A lot of us probably ask ourselves, what can I do, or what do I need to do? Or maybe it's asked of you, what can you do to impact the next giving day, the next entering class for many of you who work in advancement and enrollment, or maybe the next capital campaign. I think this data, my hope for this data, is that it makes clear that we have to play the long game here. And I appreciate that Joe raised the tension in the chat about what this means for an institution like his and a shop like his. But we have to focus on the long-term cultivation of our alum and showcase the ways in which they can make a difference through our respective institutions. And that is not work that is going to be accomplished overnight. And it will be very easy to prioritize short-term deadlines and initiatives over that long-term work. But that matters, that ability to succeed in that long-term cultivation, that work matters for higher education. In some cases, I would say it almost feels existential. And so I hope the last point that we were able to make here today with you all is that this work is accomplished when higher education marketing leadership and advancement leadership can come together to make a bigger impact together, and gathering their resources together, their strategies together, their goals together. I think that is the way that we can accomplish some of the challenges that we saw in this data and take advantage of some of the opportunities that we saw in this data. So with that, I think you've heard from us long enough. I want to hear from you. I know we all want to hear from you. So I want to open it up for those of you who have unanswered questions and want to drop those in the Q&A. There's been a great stream of those coming through already. I want to raise one that I saw was asked individually, but I want to surface it for the whole group here. And we'll start with this one, which was, is there any mention in the survey or open-ended responses about how the student experience plays into giving? So for an example, if an alum has a terrible or even just meh experience, there's only so much that can be done through marketing and communications to improve a connection that would compel someone to give. I think that's a great question. And Meredith, I know you're here with us, and I think maybe from a data standpoint, we could answer that question more broadly for the group. And then for Sara and Jason, I'd love to hear what else you might want to add to that idea of the student experience and the role it plays in future giving.
Yeah, so we did ask several questions that we used as kind of our markers for student experience. The vast majority of our respondents who had negative responses, the vast majority of our respondents were positive in those questions. It was a minority that had kind of negative student experience ratings. We did, if you isolate them though, yes, of course, they have more negative perceptions of higher ed, they're less likely to give, that certainly does have a big impact on their connection and propensity to give. But that's also, there's nothing you can do about it. It's kind of my thought on that. It's not surprising. It's not really, I think it's kind of a finding that we expected, but that was overall the minority of respondents.
I think the only thing that I would add there is that going back to that one data point that we talked about throughout, the majority of respondents indicate that they had a positive experience, and that if they had a chance to do over, they would pick their same school. And so, that I think tends to be, would need to be our focus, is how do we identify those students that are, or those alum, I should say, that are feeling that way. Because one of the things that we know is that in order to build successful brand and to build affinity, it really is as much about the experience, the proof that people have, as it is around the expectations that are set through the marketing and communications that you are doing. And so, what we're really looking to ultimately influence are perceptions and attitudes, which certainly can be a part of the marketing communications and storytelling that you do, but more importantly, behaviors, and reinforce those behaviors. And so, those are the things that I think build the long-term engagement, create the opportunities for people to volunteer, and ultimately lead to more gifts, and also to the idea that those people can be advocates, not just for your institution, but for higher education more broadly. There has to be a alignment of the story that you tell and the experience on the ground. And too often there is misalignment, and that's what leads to poor experience and lack of engagement.
There was a great question just now from Courtney about asking participants about the level of their education and if graduate alumni were more inclined or not to give versus undergrad alumni. I know, Meredith, you mentioned that we did ask about the level of education, and the one difference I would highlight, I think, is one that Sara presented in the third finding, in which we saw that young alumni are more likely to give back to their graduate alma mater versus their undergraduate alma mater. They're also more likely to give to an institution. Alumni in their 20s are most likely of all age groups to give to an institution that they did not attend or a family member did not attend, which again, I think speaks to some of the mission elements that we saw earlier in terms of schools aligning themselves to causes and being good stewards of those donations. There's a question from Jennifer about the types of volunteerism that people are interested in and how they rank. I know, Meredith, we asked this question a lot in individual client research, and the responses here are pretty consistent in terms of types of activities that are appealing to alumni.
Yeah,
I did a lot of work on the study for that. I'm sorry, I meant to finish that thought.
Yeah, I mean, we do have the additional analysis that we have or data that we have is really more that subgroup analysis and breakouts of where there are and are not differences by various demographic variables or school types.
I think there's an interesting question, Sarah and Jason, that I'm interested to get your take on, which is around kind of the relationship between marketing leadership and advancement leadership and opportunities to, we'll just say, create more healthy relationships. I think we noted or mentioned a few times in this study the opportunity for marketing and advancement to come closer together. And I know there was a comment in the chat earlier about the hypothetical or metaphorical brick wall that can sometimes feel like it exists on campus. Jason, I'll start with you. Any thoughts on just ways that CMOs and CAOs can work a little bit closer together to approach some of the things we saw in this data?
Well, it's interesting. I know that, we often get asked what's the right model and what's the right organizational structure, where should marketing report? And I know that we feel at SimpsonScarborough really strongly that marketing communications should be a cabinet level position, but that part of that relationship means it has to have really, really strong ties, not only across the institution and institutional priorities, but specifically with advancement and enrollment, because those are two front-facing business drivers of the institution. So the reality is there's not a perfect organizational structure. I mean, many of these institutions have changed and morphed in the last 20 years, in particular. And a lot of times that's a function of people and not necessarily a function of the right strategic organizational alignment. And so it's hard work, first of all, is the first answer there, Steve. The walls have to be broken down by individuals with a strong willingness to work together. Doing so then allows for a lot of alignment and a lot of opportunities to be able to have shared resources, whether we're talking about technology or whether we're talking about things like setting up good, strong communications flows. And one of the things that I think we really emphasize a lot with our clients is the importance of aligning big brand moments and brand strategy. So whether we're launching some form of external reputation building campaign or even enrollment campaigns, those kinds of things need to be aligned to the same things that we feel like are important to donors and important to getting engagement. And all too often, they're disconnected, whether strategically or thematically. And we really work hard with our clients to try to build that alignment, and then know that many of our clients on the ground are doing that hard work. And in fact, just to preview it a little bit, and we would offer to some of the senior marketing communications leaders that are on this call, we have a session scheduled for next week through our CMO lab with some of our colleagues from Boise State University, where their vice president of marketing communication and their vice president of advancement are going to be on a session where we're talking about how to build an effective partnership. So if that's something that you're in a senior leadership role, we'd be happy to have you reach out to us and have you included in that session.
Maybe we've got time for one last question. And Sarah, I want to send this one to you. We get a lot of questions kind of like this one around communication channels that alumni want to hear or do hear from their alma maters. I'm curious about this question related to paid media and if it's worth investing in media to reach an audience that I think many people really kind of almost think about in terms of they're already captured from an attention standpoint. Can you speak a little bit to paid media in terms of trying to reach alumni for institutions?
Sure. I think what I'll start with is that it's most important that institutions focus on foundational elements of owned or direct outreach to alum audiences. And that provides the opportunity to leverage paid media as an amplification of those communications. Where we have significant benefit in the direct communications is the ability to have a level of personalization, and in most cases, or many cases, longer form content, and one-to-one communication. Paid media is incredibly valuable in today's landscape because it is very cluttered and there's a lot of message in the market. And what that means for a lot of audiences, particularly younger generations, is that it requires more visibility to build and maintain awareness. And that's not even considering things around maintaining familiarity and then moving into consideration and ultimately taking action. Similar to the benefits of connecting marketing and communications with advancement teams and creating a unified holistic strategy for alum in that way, paid media operates similarly, leveraging centralized campaigns around paid media for the institution are valuable for alum. We know that alum value a sense of community and connection. So the last piece of paid media that's critically important is taking a lot of time to think about what to say. There's a shared goal at institutions around elevating society overall, lives, health, medicine, technology, and we have a significant impact there. Paid media can help to extend that message and reach people so they can see the impact their institutions are having, and start to reinforce that sense of community that in the short, mid, or long term can ultimately move them to taking the actions that we'd like them to.
Okay, and with that, we are right about at the hour. I want to thank Sara, Jason, Carrie, Meredith for their work today in this last 60 minutes and the last several months getting us up to this stage, as well as everybody from SimpsonScarborough. To every one of you who attended our session today, thank you for your time, your attention, your great insights, perspectives, questions. We really appreciate it. As I mentioned before, we will be sharing a copy of this recording, as well as a copy of the full research report later on to everyone who attended today. If you have other questions and want to follow up, please do feel to reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. And until next time, keep on keeping on. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it.